So first thing I want to say is papers are coming back to you next week. They're mostly graded, but I still have to do a few more. I'm going to try to return them on Blackboard. I've never done that before. I've usually just resorted to email, but I decided to keep it all in one place would be easier. If I can figure out how to do it on Blackboard, I will. If not, expect your paper back to you with comments as a PDF in your email inbox. So check all your emails. If by the end of next week you haven't heard from me, it means that I sent it there and you didn't check your email, or I missed your paper or just forgot to send it. But hopefully I'll be able to post it to the Blackboard because it's a lot simpler if it's all kept in one place, and then you can all see it and know exactly where to look and you don't have to dig through your emails. All that sound good to everybody? All right. Awesome. So yeah, they will be coming back to you next week. So today's topic is, well, let me just write it down. What is regulation? That is my first question. Or what is it to regulate something? That is our topic for today, regulation. It's about control. Yes, it's about controlling things. What else can we say about it? So it's about controlling, but not every type of control is regulation. So what is like the real core? So I can have self-control if I don't get angry, but that's not, I guess in some sense I'm regulating myself. But usually in the sense of regulation, what are we talking about? If we say that the internet is or is not regulated, what do we mean? So tied in with taxable. So, and what is it that taxes are? What can we think of taxes are? It's taking money, but it's specifically about money and control and who is putting the taxes in, who is doing the control. So for instance, we say cigarettes are regulated. Yeah, it's about governments controlling a certain sort of area or thing. So I just said cigarettes. What are some other things that are regulated in the United States? Alcohol is another good one. So yeah, alcohol is regulated. And what does it mean for these things to be regulated? So in what way is alcohol regulated? What is it that the government says about alcohol? Or what are the rules in place around it? So yeah, it's things like when you're allowed to sell it, where you're allowed to sell it, and how old you have to be to buy it, and what you have to do as a seller in terms of checking to see people's ages. That's what regulation means. Regulation is putting rules in place, either officially or unwritten rules, that control how people use or get access to a thing. So just to put down the definition. The act of controlling how people interact with something, usually by making rules. So yeah, regulation is about controlling, or another way of putting it is controlling how people behave. So it's the act of controlling how people interact with something or how they behave. So we've got alcohol, we've got cigarettes. What are some other things that are regulated in the United States? Other things that are regulated. Come on. Medication, yes. So in what ways are medications regulated? All medications are regulated. So how is it? So who can sell medications is one. What else? Yeah, you need a prescription for a lot of them. So whether you have permission to get them, where you can get them, how they're sold to you, age you can drive. Driving is also regulated. So you have to have a driver's license. You have to be a certain age. How else is driving regulated? What are some of the other regulations on driving? Yeah, you need to have the car inspected. You can't just drive anything. Also, there are certain things you're not allowed to do while driving. You can't be drunk, exactly. All of these are the things we're talking about with regulation. So what we're going to be discussing today is regulation in an internet context. And that means regulating two different sorts of things. One is what regulation of internet, what you can access / how others give you information. So these are what we're going to be talking about. And we're really going to more be discussing this and controlling, I guess, what you can access and how, the best way of putting it is how you can access, or what you can access and how you behave. And you here being general, both how you personally behave and how others behave with you. So what you can access and post, and then what sorts of behaviors you can engage in on the internet. That's going to be our topic. And what we're going to really talk about are some of the ethical issues that come up with both regulating the internet in terms of why we think regulating the internet is good, why there are some worries about regulating the internet, and then also a lot of ethical, practical considerations about why it's so damn difficult to regulate the internet. So first question I want to ask you is this one. And this is going to be an open question that doesn't have an obvious answer, but should the internet be regulated? And if so, how much? So what do you all think? The internet and what you post on it and how you behave on it. Should it be regulated? And if so, how much should it be regulated? So let's just start with, should it be regulated generally, or should it just be anything goes? Is that yes, it should be regulated, Sammy? All right. What are other people's views? Yeah, so should be regulated. Are there anyone who thinks that we should just let it go? Anything goes on the internet? Anybody at all who thinks that we should just let the internet be and anything goes on it? All right. So everyone thinks it should be regulated to some degree. So here's the question. How much? How much should the internet be regulated? And there's no like simple way of explaining or like describing this, because there's many different ways of regulation and there's many different types of things that can be regulated. So we'll talk about that in 1 second. But generally speaking, how much regulation do we want on the internet? Because do we want it to be as controlled as something like, well, let's talk about extremes here. There are countries in which internet behavior is very, very closely regulated. We talked about one a couple classes ago. So where is somewhere in which your behavior on the internet is highly regulated? What you can and cannot do is very limited. So North Korea is one. Finn, did you have one?
China?
Yeah, China is another big one. China, North Korea, these are places in which you are very, very strongly regulated. So does anyone know what internet regulation looks like in these sorts of countries? What are some of the things that you can't do there that you can do here, for instance?
You cannot use Facebook in China.
Yeah.
You have to use Weibo, which is the app. Social media.
Sorry, I just talked over you. Continue. Yes, so
that's it.
All right. So yeah, you have to use Weibo. You can't use Facebook. Also, I'm pretty sure Google is blocked. There are also things where if you post them, your posts will be taken down. So for instance, if you, you know, there was a big thing where if you were calling the head of the Chinese government Winnie the Pooh, you could get in trouble for that. There are other things in which if you bash the politicians, they can shut down your internet access or even, you know, come after you. They are people checking the internet at all times to check to see what you're saying and how you say it. Now, on the other side of that, we've got someplace more like the US. In the US, what limits are there on regulation? And we're going to come back to more details, but there are certain things that are regulated and illegal to do on the internet, even here in the United States. Anyone know what some of the things you can't do are? Yeah, you can't threaten people. You can't actively make threats. So that's one thing you can't do. What else can't you do? A lot of them have to do with selling and things like that. So yeah, you can't do internet piracy. You can't download things. You can't buy or sell drugs. Can't buy weapons. Another big one is you can't buy, sell, or exchange child pornography. So there are limits, but there's a lot of things you can do in the United States on the internet, which you cannot do in a place with a more control over the internet. And so one of the benefits, well, what are the benefits of having it more the United States way? What are some of the benefits to not having this sort of extreme regulation? So yeah, there is a greater freedom of expression and there's a lot more privacy for you. Somebody's not looking over your shoulder. You can say what's on your mind without worrying about it. What are though some of the flip side? What are some of the problems with having a less regulated system without having the government? So yeah, you can end up with something like 4chan, where if there's not someone regulating it, you can end up with some very heinous, terrible sorts of things. And we're going to be talking about that a little bit more later in class, where things like hate speech and fake news are much better able to spread in a place like the United States, in which it's less regulated, than somewhere in China, or somewhere like China, where it's regulated by the government. Now, the flip side is, the US government can't stamp out things it doesn't want to hear in the way the Chinese government could. But the flip side, again, is that the Chinese government can get rid of fake news in a way the US government cannot. So, as we'll be talking about later, it has goods and bads to it. So does everyone understand, generally speaking, why we want the internet to be regulated to some degree? We all on board with this general sort of thing that we want the internet to be regulated somewhat. And the question then becomes, how much do we want it to be regulated? But here's a real issue with the internet, is how do you regulate it? And this is where a lot of the ethical worries come up. Because you see on the internet people who are far more willing to say and do things that they wouldn't say and do in person. And the sorts of rules that we have in everyday life don't seem to be applied as well on the internet. And you end up with things in which there's a lot less regulation than you would ideally want. So what I want to talk about now are the difficulties, the problems, and why it's so hard to regulate the internet. Because you might look at it and say, I don't want a world in which people post anti-Asian hate on their Facebook page and lots of people like it. However, when you start diving in with what the issues are around how you'd actually go about stopping it, it becomes clear that it's very difficult to do. And the act of stopping this sort of thing raises a lot of questions in its own right. So that's going to be the plan now. Now that we know that we want to regulate the internet, you have to ask, how can you do it in a way that is ethical and also accomplishes the good goals you want without overstepping? And unlike in the real world, where there's a lot of physical constraints that make that easy, on the internet, it becomes very, very difficult to put things in place that would allow for the level of regulation that we might want ideally without itself causing ethical issues. So the first issue with the internet is this. What type of thing is the internet? Let's go the other way. So here's the basic idea. There are two different sorts of things that get regulated, or two different ways of regulating things. One is by regulating a place or a space, place/space, and the other is through regulating a medium. So first off, what do we mean by a place or a space? And I don't mean this in any sort of sophisticated sense, but when you're talking about a place, what is it that you mean? And I mean this in your everyday life. If you say, I'm going to a place, what are you talking about? And what are some of the things that characterize a place? And I know this is almost like so yeah, it's a specific location. It's about a physical location. So when I say I'm going to a place, like if I'm going to the drugstore, I'm talking about a particular physical location that I can put my physical body in. Because of this, because of the nature of physical space, how is it that spaces get regulated? So for instance, the drugstore has a lot of regulations around it. What are some of the ways in which the physical location of the drugstore is regulated? Or how is it that the physical space of the drugstore applies regulations to the medicines that it sells? Do people understand that question? Basically, the drugstore, as we said, medicine is regulated. And one of the main ways it gets regulated is by exploiting the fact that it's sold in a physical place with an address in a location. So how does the fact that our drugstore is a physical location allow us to regulate medicine sales? What are some of the ways in which medicine gets regulated in a drugstore? Well, how many of you have gotten prescription medication at a drugstore before? So yeah, so one thing, so those of you who have gotten prescription medication from a drugstore, describe the process. Describe what you have to do to get drugs from a drugstore if it's a prescription medication. So say it's like a anti-anxiety medicine. So you have to give your name and date of birth, but specifically to who? Do you just walk in and say, my name is David Neely and I was born yada, 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 yada? Yeah, you have to go up specifically to a pharmacist. And why do you have to go up to the pharmacist and give them your name and date of birth? Why can't you just grab your medicine? And I don't mean like the big picture. I mean, physically speaking, why can't you just grab your medicine off the cabinet and walk out and pay at the front counter? So yeah, they have to be, no worries, Joel. They have to be authorized to distribute it. But physically speaking, what is it that stops you from just picking up your medicine and walking out? And I'm asking, like this is the most bare basic level in which I'm asking this. I'm not asking you for what their reasons behind it are. I mean, physically speaking, why can you not go in there? So again, Kevin, you're answering a much more complicated question than the stupid one I'm trying to answer. Scott's the one I'm talking. This is the level of like stupid question I'm trying to ask, but it's so obvious. I think all of you jumped a level ahead. So Scott says it's the wall behind the farm. Yeah, basically there's a wall between you and them. So Kevin, your answer was spot on for the question I asked, but I was just trying to be even dumber, but I didn't do a good job of being dumb enough. So yeah, there's a physical wall that keeps you from getting to it. So for instance, here's the overhead layout of a pharmacy. You walk in the front door here, you walk in and there's a wall that keeps you from getting to the medicine you want. So in a physical space, you can regulate it by preventing people from getting to what they would otherwise be able to get to. So a physical location, you regulate things using physical space because you don't want people to get addicted or to get more than they need. And you do that by just putting up physical walls and physical barriers. Even if you wanted more medication than you should have, or if you didn't care and wanted to get this stuff because you were addicted, well, the physical wall and the pharmacist there prevents you from being able to do it. So a physical space gets regulated by literally putting up walls, and you can regulate things that are sold in a physical space by stopping people from getting into those areas. Same thing with like the Pentagon. The Pentagon is, well, what is the Pentagon? Just general US politics question. What's the Pentagon? What is housed there? So yeah, it's tied in with where the spies are. Actually, I don't know. Well, yeah, there are definitely some spies there, but more generally, CIA is actually not there. And I don't think FBI are. They have their own headquarters. What department of the government is, however, headquartered in the Pentagon? It's tied in with spies. Yeah, Department of Defense, DOD, Department of Defense. You can, and intelligence tied in with that sort of thing. And the US government is a very complicated monster, and different branches have intelligence and these sorts of things. But generally speaking, it's Department of Defense. Now, if you wanted to go and learn US government secrets and wanted to do it by going into the Pentagon, you would not be able to. Why? How do they regulate access to the government secrets using the Pentagon? What does the Pentagon have that keeps you out, basically? They have security guards. That's one big thing. And the other, even more basic one, is they have walls and doors. They keep you out of things because it's a physical space. So with this in mind, with physical spaces, you regulate them by literally putting up walls and controlling who can get in. So a place gets regulated by controlling who gets in. Now, that's not the only type of thing that gets regulated. We also regulate medium, a medium. Does anyone know what the plural of medium is? I'll give you a clue. It's something that gets talked about a lot, especially by people who are bashing it. What's the plural of medium? It's a Latin word for those who care. You'll often hear this word applied to things like CNN and Fox News and, yeah, media. So media. Now, the way that media has come to be used is slightly different than what it was originally used for. So when we're talking about a medium, we're not just talking about a news channel, we're rather talking about a way in which information is exchanged. So how many of you have heard of mediums? Just to clear it up, the correct pronunciation would be media, but I'm gonna use mediums just because it'll keep us from thinking about CNN and those sorts of things. How many of you have heard of mediums in the context of ghosts? Has anyone heard about, like, they went to a medium to talk to their dead grandma or something like that? Have people heard this sense of it? So what is it the medium in this context with ghosts is doing? Like, what is the purpose of this person? They're the communicator. Another way of putting this is they are the channel by which one thing is able to talk to another. So in this sense, when we're talking about mediums, we're talking about the ways in which information gets communicated. So in this case, it's a physical person who is the channel by which the ghost talks to their living family member. So in that context, when we're talking about mediums in a context of things that aren't ghosts, we're talking about things like radio. The radio is the way that the broadcaster connects with the audience. The AM radio or FM radio is a type of medium. What then would be some other examples of this? It's a channel by which people communicate with one another, or by which information gets passed. So I'm going to put internet over here because in a lot of ways, the internet does seem like a medium. The internet is something that it's a channel by which you connect with consumers and you process information. However, we're going to talk in a second about why thinking of the internet just as a medium runs into some issues. So what's a more classic case of a type of medium? What is something that you might watch when you're at home? And not just YouTube. Yeah, TV. So TV is a medium. TV is something that reaches out across the entire nation, spreads out. So the TV channel is the medium by which programs are presented to you. So does everyone understand that the difference between a medium and place? Place is a physical location. A medium is a channel by which information gets passed between two things. Does that distinction make sense to everyone? All right. So if that's the difference between a medium and a place, and we said places are regulated by who can get in and out, how are mediums regulated? So how is a radio station regulated? How is a TV channel regulated? So it's through censorship. And what does censorship mean in this case? So what do we mean by censorship? What is it to censor something? So when we say, yeah, blocking information. So you regulate a medium by controlling what gets passed along it. What gets passed along. So for instance, there are certain rules on the TV that say, as Daniel says, there are clear laws about what can and cannot be shown on TV. So it's not like, if you have a physical location, so let's just use a classic case of pornography. If you have a bookstore, a physical bookstore, and one of the things you sell is pornography, but you don't want children looking at the porn, what do you do as the bookstore? Or what are the laws around pornographic magazines in a bookstore? Does anyone know what the laws around pornographic magazines are in bookstores? So you have to have an ID to buy it. But what else even in the store itself? So Daniel, they give it their own section. And also very often, it has to be in the back. So you can't have the porn set up right in the front. You have to put it all the way in the back. Also, generally speaking, with pornographic magazines, which I don't even know, the internet may have killed pornographic magazines. I'm not sure. I haven't, looked in a bookstore for pornographic magazines in ever. So, but it's usually wrapped in a piece of plastic, so you can't open it in the store and just flip through. Very often, also, if it's like if it's some sort of very often it'll be like in a separate room that you have to get into. And if you're a small child, they won't let you in if there's like a large pornography section. So that's how you would regulate pornography in a physical space. How, by contrast, is porn regulated on TV? What is it that they do to regulate porn on TV? So they either blur stuff, so they have to physically cover things up. What else might they do? Or what are some other ways in which pornographic videos are regulated on the internet or on TV? Well, how many of you, there's a special channel for it. And even within that, there's special times that you have to are allowed to show it. So HBO is not allowed to show pornography at 11 a.m. on a Sunday because the assumption is a child flipping through the channels might find it there. So the way you regulate a medium is by the time and what is allowed to be shown. So because of this, a physical space, you can just put up walls, you can have anything you want, and you just keep people out of getting in there. By contrast with a medium, the assumption is anyone can get access to the information. So therefore, you need to put it, you need to control what even exists in that medium, because you can't just put up a wall. It's not like all of a sudden, as soon as the porn comes on TV, a wall gets built in front of your television to keep the kids from watching. And that's not the way that a medium works. So does everyone understand that? Places get regulated by putting up physical barriers, and mediums get regulated by controlling what is allowed to be shown on that medium. Now, why am I talking about this medium versus place thing? Well, here's the simple reason. What is the internet? Is the internet a medium or is the internet a place? And that's exactly the problem. It says both. The internet is in some sense a place and in some sense a medium. So why do we say it's a medium? What is it about the internet that is medium-like? Yeah, it's a way of passing information. And just like TV, which goes across a lot of wires and a lot of like radio waves, the internet's the same thing. The internet at the end of the day, running under the oceans, are big physical fiber optic cables that carry electrical information back and forth. So it's not just like cyberspace is some magical thing. If you access a website in Europe, there's literally a signal that goes underneath the Atlantic Ocean to come to you. There's, just like with radio, there are physical waves traveling through the air. So in a certain sense then, we would expect it to be the case that the internet, like other mediums, you should control what is upon it. However, what's the difference between a regular medium and the internet? Or another way of putting this, how is an internet like a place as opposed to a medium? What are some of the place-like characteristics? Well, when you go on the internet, do you just go on the internet? How many of you have just spent time on the internet? All of it at once? No, as there's a browser, as Thin says, but as Scott says, there's different websites, there's different locations. There are different channels on a medium, but it's not like you can like walk around and control where in the medium you go. If you're on a certain channel, you get everything on that channel all at once. By contrast with the internet, you go to different websites and different parts of different websites. And it seems like, in a certain way, it's more like a space. Also, it seems like, as with a space, you can at least theoretically put up walls around the internet in a way you can't with TV. So what is it that you have to enter every time you want to get on a website? Well, not any website, but say you want to check into your email, or you want to go to something that you have a subscription with. What do you have to do every time you want to get in? Or your bank website. Yeah, you have to log in. You have to type in a password. So that's just like with a physical space where you have to show an ID card, or you have to walk in and be like, hi, I'm looking for this. And they'll say it's at the pharmacy. And you have to go up and you say, this is my name. Here's my ID. Here's my date of birth. In the same way, with the internet, you often have to log in and say, here's my username, here's my password, here's my date of birth. I can watch this video. So in some ways, the internet is like a place, but in other ways, it's like a medium, because while there are ways in which it's regulated, unlike a physical space, it's much harder to put these walls up. So for instance, in a bookstore that's selling pornography, they have a physical person there looking at the people to make sure that the person walking in is over the age of 18. On the internet, by contrast, what is there? If you try to go to a pornographic website, what comes up when you get there? It's not like a physical guard who's looking you in the eye. Instead, what comes up? So either nothing in a lot of cases, or at best, there's going to be you have to be over 18, press here to prove that you're over 18. But there's never anyone there checking to make sure that you're actually over 18. So in theory, even though we can say the internet is a place, on the other hand, the internet in some ways is like a medium where it's very easy for people who you don't want to see something to get there, unlike in a physical place. So on the one hand, it seems like the internet is a place where you can regulate it just by putting things in different locations. But on the other hand, everyone can access those locations much more easily than they can with a physical location. So this just creates a big issue around how then do you stop children from seeing things you don't want them to see on the internet? In a physical space, it's easy. You put up a wall and you don't let the kids in. With a medium, you just don't put it on there. But how do you do it with the internet? If you don't want children to watch pornography, how do you design an internet that's going to allow that to take place? How do you stop kids from looking at porn? So does everyone see the ethical worry here? Of like, it's not clear how you would go about doing it. So I think what a lot of groups have wanted to say, like very strong anti-pornography groups, is say, we just have to keep it like a place. We have to build it up and make it very, very difficult to access, and everything has to be behind a passworded wall. But what are the worries around doing that with every sort of website? Any website that has compromising information, why would that never get off the ground? What is the issues with saying anything that is adult content of any sort, be it pornographic or sociopolitical or anything like that? What's the worry with putting it behind a wall or a paywall or making it difficult to access? Yeah, so less people will see it. And how is it that the internet makes money? What is the key to making money? Ads. So you need clicks and visibility to make money. So you've got this thing in which part of the reason that the internet's so hard to regulate is that because it has these medium qualities in which the thing you need are eyes on your programming, but it's got these place qualities of you could theoretically regulate it by stopping people from getting in. They kind of pull in opposite directions. And so the main way in which you could regulate it is not something that most websites would want to do. On top of that, the consumer, how many of you like entering passwords? How many of you, it's your favorite thing to get onto a website and have to remember which of your 7 passwords is the right one? Justin, you're a password lover? Yeah, nobody, it seems like, enjoys this sort of thing. Nobody wants to enter passwords. So the main, like having a physical location and having a guard there who's just like, no, you can't come in. That's not very difficult or hard or annoying to deal with. But with the internet, because the internet is about connectivity, every sort of thing you put up that treats it more like a space or a place ends up being a major inconvenience. And this is why people get hacked all the time, because we end up getting so tired of having to enter our passwords that we end up using the same password for everything, or writing down our password and then somebody sees it written. So this is the first issue with the internet, is it seems like, practically speaking, treating it as a place isn't really going to get off the ground, but treating it like a medium also seems a bit over the top, because we don't want to just allow anything to be on the internet within like the legal realm. We still want to have some controls. And so what we end up with is this mess that is impossible to regulate as either a place or a medium. We basically have this new thing like a medium place and no laws or rules around how those sorts of things should be governed. So does all of this make sense to everybody? Does anyone have any questions at this point about the mediums versus place things? All right, let's move on to the second reason that it's so difficult. The second reason that I think it's so difficult to regulate the internet is that the classic ways in which things are regulated do not seem to work well on the internet. We have 3 ways in which we typically regulate things that seem too weak to apply to the internet. And then we have 1 way of regulating that seems too strong in a certain sort of way. And it's too strong and changes who has the control. We'll talk about that one last. But first off, we're going to talk about the 3 major ways in which things get regulated off the internet. And we're going to see that none of them seem to work well on the internet. So it just ends up with this practical issue of, if we want to regulate the internet and none of these ways work too well, then what we need to do to ensure that we regulate it ends up being itself an ethical worry. So the first way things are very often regulated is what? What prevents you from driving too quickly? What prevents you from, let's see, what prevents you from what are some other things that are, what prevents you from drinking in a bar if you're 16? As Daniel says, it's law. So the law is the way in which many things get regulated. Now, what's the best way of putting this? Why do we use regulation by law? What are the advantages of legal regulation, generally speaking? Why is it that we live in a nation of laws? What is it about law that we like? Why do we have it all written down? Why do we follow it? Why don't we just say, we can all decide individually what's right and wrong? We just say, it's up to you and your family to punish you for things you don't like. What about the law is so valuable? Another way of putting this is, why wouldn't you, what do you like about living in a place with laws? And what wouldn't you like if we decide to get rid of all the laws? Imagine today I just snap my fingers. So one thing is there's order. And why is there order? What is it about the law that provides a certain level of order? So it serves to keep everyone in check, but it doesn't just keep everyone in check, because if everyone just carried around a really big stick and anyone who was doing something bad, we just started hitting each other, that would in some ways also keep many people in check. So what is it about the fact that it's written down and codified in a law book that isn't extra nice for us? So exactly, it's clear. It's a lot clearer. I mean, it's not perfectly clear. There's a reason why there are lawyers and they can argue about the terminology. But generally speaking, laws are quite clear and tell you exactly what is and isn't okay. If it says that the speed limit is 55 and you're going 80, well, you know exactly how much over the speed limit you're going. Other things, what are some other things that are nice about laws? Well, who decides the law? Who makes new laws? So state and federal governments, and at least in theory, who decides who's in state and federal government? Yeah, in theory at least, and of course, no governmental system is perfect, but ideally you have some say in the grander scheme. You vote for politicians who then try to pass laws. So at the very least, you have some control over the laws themselves. They're clear. They're also public. Like if you want to know what is legal and what is illegal, you can, at least in theory, look it up and you have some say. So this is the advantage of having a law as a way of governing. However, laws are not perfect. And in fact, there are certain things that need to hold true in order for law to work. And what we find is a lot of them don't apply very nicely on the internet. So what do you need in order for a law to be effective, or for laws to be an effective way of governing something? In order to have a law, say, what's the best way of putting this? In order for a law around, say, narcotics to work, what do you need? So let's say laws around heroin use. What do you need in order for the laws about heroin to be effective and actually stop people from using heroin? So, and what do you mean by campaigns here, Carlos? Because I think you're right. I just want to make sure that we're on the same page. So one thing you need to do is you also, it's not just enough to have law around it, because one thing is heroin is illegal in this country and yet people are still using it. So one issue is that laws are not by themselves ever really strong enough to stop things. You need laws along with other things. And also on top of this, as Finn says, it's not just that you need the law, you also need some sort of enforcement. So for the law to work, you need enforcement. And very often the other issue is that laws by themselves don't stop things. Laws need to be supplemented. So these are two things about the about regulating things by law. And why is it that things are regulated by law? The fact that you need them to be supplemented and you need enforcement. Why is it that the internet makes this sort of regulation hard? What is it about the nature of the internet that makes it very difficult to regulate things using the law? Just think about this one for a second. Why not just put new laws on the internet that prevent things from happening? You know, we don't like that there are pornographic websites, just make them all illegal. Or we don't like that there's internet piracy, so just make it illegal to download files. What is the worry around this? Why doesn't that work very well? You can stop people from mugging in the streets much more effectively. So one issue is it's not taken seriously. And why isn't it taken seriously? Why are people like, I can't just go, you know what? I don't care that the law says, no mugging. I like mugging, so therefore I'm going to do it. Well, it seemed, by contrast though, if it says, you know, I don't care that they say I'm not allowed to download this file, I'm going to download it anyway. I'm far more likely to do that than to say, I don't care that they say I shouldn't mug. I'm going to go mug someone on the street. The first thing, as Daniel says, is enforcement is much harder. And why is enforcement so much harder? What is it about enforcement that is more difficult? And we talked about this a couple classes ago. What is it about law enforcement and the internet that makes it so hard to enforce? You can't get a ticket online. So that's one thing, is you can't just walk up. It's not like cops are just like walking. You can walk a physical street. You can't walk the internet. What are some other issues around it? This goes back to jurisdictional worries from a few classes back. Yeah, so people from all over the world with different laws can access the internet. Exactly. And you only have a jurisdiction over somebody who's in your area. So if a website is hosted in the United States, but accessed by someone in North Korea or say Saudi Arabia, it's unclear which law enforcement branch is doing it. Also, it's not illegal for the website to exist in the United States. Therefore, if somebody accesses it from another place, it's very difficult to say, like, how would you shut it down? Typically, the way you'd shut down a drug dealer is you don't go and just arrest the people getting the drugs. You try to find the person who's selling them. But if it's not illegal to sell them where they are, then it becomes very difficult to see how you could shut it down. So if you've got a pornographic website, and in the place where the website's hosted, it's perfectly legal to have pornography, then it's very difficult to see how you could shut down that website if you're a country that doesn't allow pornography. And the reason that China is able to do this is quite literally, China has physical control over the fiber optic cables that enter China. So the reason, like the Great Firewall that they talk of with China, is only possible because of the nature of the infrastructure underlying Chinese internet. So the United States has hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of fiber optic cables. So if this is us, there's some running into Canada, there's some running across the ocean, there's some running this way. And so if you wanted to control people's access to a certain website, you'd have to shut down or control every single one of these things. By contrast, in China, there's something like 7 total fiber optic cables that enter the nation near Beijing up through the ocean. And so it becomes very possible for them to control what goes in and out. But in a place like the United States, where there are incredible numbers of connections, it's almost impossible to stop people from accessing a website if that website exists. And if you want to shut it down for doing something illegal, so let's go with something like, do people know what the Pirate Bay is? I don't know what it is. It was a .org for a while. It's been a .se. Do people know what this website is? Yeah. So what is it, Daniel?
It's a website where you could download pretty much anything, like
Yeah.
Adobe or Microsoft Word. Everything's like cracked. And
Yeah. Basically, it's just a website that hosts things that you can download illegally. And so it basically any movies, websites, program or movies, music, programs, anything you want, you can download from here. It has been around for over a decade. Why is it? And everyone knows it's illegal for us to access it. Why hasn't this website been shut down? Anyone know? Why is it that something like the Pirate Bay? Well, what ends up happening is as soon as it gets shut down, they just open up it on a new URL. And because they are located, I think generally in Sweden or other places, yeah, they set up a new server. And on top of that, they just move the server to a new location. So if you shut them down in Sweden and then they move to Norway, you have to deal with a new government to shut it down. So in each of these cases, there's this major enforcement issue. And then on top of this, and we'll talk about this in a second with the other things, law alone isn't enough. And we're going to talk in a second about why the other ways, the ways in which things are usually supplemented, also don't work on the internet. But here's a third one. Murder or killing, or let's just put killing. Killing is highly regulated. And it's highly regulated by law. Now, why are we able to regulate it by law? Well, think about it. How long have murder laws been around? Years, yeah. The laws around murder are very, very old. They can be traced back through history, through centuries, maybe even millennia, because our laws around murder probably go back to like ancient Roman law codes. So something like killing is very new and very regulated. Contrast that with something like data mining. If we wanted to come up with a law around data mining, well, killing has been around for a long time to write the laws. Data mining. How long has data mining been around? The act of gathering large amounts of data. Yeah, decades maybe. Maybe decades, or at most a few years. Or I mean, at the least a few years. So we're talking, let's say, in its major form, let's say 15 years. So what's the difference here? Well, 15 years is a very short amount of time compared to millennia. And what do you need to get a new law passed? Everyone remember going back, how many of you had to watch that Schoolhouse Rock video back in like 7th grade or 8th grade about how a new law gets passed? Anybody? Are they still forcing you to watch that thing? Well, even if not, what do you need to do to get a law passed in the United States? Anyone know, just like generally speaking, what the, so you've got to vote for it. So to take an actual example, right now for the past year, Biden has been trying to get a new infrastructure plan passed. Has he succeeded yet? No, it's been a year and it hasn't changed. So if we're talking about this with data mining, and this is like Biden's main goal coming into office, and it's taken 1/15 of the entire time that data mining has been around and nothing's been accomplished here. Now take it in this way, other sorts of things like, or I guess, long story short, in the United States, do laws get passed quickly or slowly? Slowly, yeah, super slow. Does technology change fast or slow? Fast. Very, very, very fast. And so here's the other reason why regulating things with the online is by law is so difficult. The internet changes faster than the laws can keep up. So what you have are cases in which there's no law yet. The internet starts doing a thing because it makes the company money, and there's no law to prevent it. So they're not doing anything illegal. And by the time anyone has a worry about it, it's already been going on for years. So let's talk about like Facebook and fake news. We've been having this the issue for the past 5 years in which Facebook has been having to go in front of Congress and discuss the ways in which fake news or fake misinformation is being spread across Facebook. Was Facebook allowing this to happen illegal? Was it illegal for Facebook to allow fake news to spread? Anyone know? So in some ways, there may have been some small laws, but generally speaking, it wasn't so much illegal as it was just something which shouldn't have happened. And yet there were no laws and no way of enforcing Facebook from doing these things. So it's the lawmakers also don't even know what the problem is until it's become a big problem. As we said last time, the people making the laws are old. Try to explain Facebook to your grandma and how the IPI or the advertising works. Try to explain to her why Facebook is able to spread this information and how it's tied in with their business model of getting more clicks. And what ends up happening is by the time that they even have understood that there's something that needs to be fixed, it's been going on for 10 years. So another reason that it's so hard to regulate by law is the law just cannot keep up with the technology. So we end up with things happening for a long time and things that when we look back, we're like, that was a problem. And yet we didn't change the laws fast enough to control what is happening on those sorts of websites or those sorts of pieces of technology. So does everyone understand that third issue? Law, slow, tech, fast. And so just because of this, the law cannot keep up and we end up not being able to rely on the law to stop things from happening. We ended up with Facebook and Microsoft and Amazon having so much power because by the time anyone realized that Facebook's having a system that allowed misinformation to spread, but by the time anyone realized this was a problem, it had been going on for a decade and was well entrenched. And so 10 years with no law governing it became a major issue. So all of this makes sense to everyone. So, and then here's the flip side of it that I want to highlight. So you might want to say, all right, so what do we need to do to make sure that our laws happen more quickly? What can we do to make laws a more effective way of regulating the internet? Well, it seems like one thing we need to do is make laws get passed faster. Does anyone know the best way to make a law get passed quickly? What could we do to the United States government to make it so the laws pass more quickly? What types of governments are very, very fast in their decision making? Anyone have any ideas? Think about the army for a second. So one thing would be have people who are more up to date pass the laws. But right now, what is the reason that laws take so long to get passed in the United States, generally speaking? Not just that the people aren't knowledgeable, but why is another thing? What happens on a day-to-day basis in Washington? Yeah, there's this big divide. And why is there such a big divide? Why are we able to have a divide? Simply put, there's a lot of lawmakers who have to talk about every single issue. So the quickest way you could make so what is the difference between China and the United States? Why is China able to respond much more quickly to changes in technology? Yeah, basically, the bigger your government is in terms of how many people make the decisions, the slower it works. So the quickest way we could get laws more quickly passed is if we replace the democracy with something else. That's the level of extreme that you need to go. If we wanted to become an authoritarian nation, we could pass the laws more quickly. And yet nobody wants to come along and say we should be an authoritarian nation. The fact is that the laws being passed slowly is one of the things about the US government that we value, that things can't happen in a blink of an eye because that allows wrong decisions to be made quickly. We want checks and balances. The problem is, in a time in which technology changes so quickly, that same thing which has been a benefit for most of our history is now becoming a detriment And the only way we could improve it would involve overthrowing a democracy, which none of us want to do. So the simplest way of doing it is itself a big ethical problem. Another thing you could do would be to, the only way you could allow for enforcement universally would be to get rid of national borders as they exist. Because part of the reason that it's so hard to have laws across the world with the internet is that the Russian government isn't going to help the US government, and the US government is not going to help the Russian government with law enforcement. We don't get along. So in the same way, the simplest way would be just to get rid of places like Russia and America. But again, that would never happen. And that's such an extreme sort of way of doing it. So one of the issues around law is that it's unclear how we can actually improve on this and make it better. So does all that make sense to everyone? So it's not just that we have this issue, it's also that it's more difficult to fix it than we would want it to be. All right, the second way we can regulate things is by norms. What is a norm? Anyone know what a norm is? We may have discussed this a few classes back.
Is it like something that is normalized by people?
Yeah, it's something that's a standard that's normalized. It's basically, as Daniel says, it's an unspoken law or unspoken rule that governs how you're supposed to act, it arises from what people usually do. So an example of this is there's a lot of norms around subway riding. So what are some of the things on the subway that aren't illegal, but there are norms that govern how you're supposed to behave on the subway? What are some of the unwritten rules or unspoken rules that we all know we're supposed to follow when we're on the subway? So that's a big one. You let the people get off the train first before you get on the train. What are some other ones?
Leave the seat for elderly.
Yeah, leave seats for elderly is another one. Don't be too loud. Also, if there's 20 seats available and only one person sitting, don't sit in the seat next to that person. Spread out, give everyone space. Don't start trying to have a conversation with someone who's wearing headphones. Another one, ride to the right side of the escalator. All of these are norms that govern our lives. And a good way to recognize that something's a norm is think about how you'd feel if you broke it, or think about how you feel when you see somebody else breaking it. So for instance, what is your feeling when you see someone getting on the train before the other people are let off? Yeah, yeah, Joel says another one is mind your own business, but Scott says it irks you down to your soul. Yes, it is something which, generally speaking, if you see somebody get on the train before people are let off, if you're anything like me, you get furious on like some deep level. I've often taken to just body checking people who get on the train before it's their turn, where I'll just lower my shoulder into someone just to, wait your damn turn. Another one is, how would you feel if elevators have a lot of ones? So what are some of the norms around elevator usage? How do you behave on an elevator? And how don't you behave, just as importantly? Doors open. Describe what I do now. I'm stepping into the elevator. What is correct elevator behavior? Yeah, no eye contact. Don't be rowdy. I get in, I turn around, I press my button. What would you feel if you're all sitting on an elevator, door opens, and I just stand and go like this and just smile at you all? How would you feel in that situation? If I'm just standing facing you all in the elevator smiling, yeah, it would be awkward as hell, super uncomfortable. So, and why, on the flip side, why would you not want to do that when you're getting on an elevator? If I paid you $5 to just stand on an elevator like this, why is it that you wouldn't immediately accept those $5? Maybe you would, or say $1. Why wouldn't you necessarily take that dollar? How would you feel being that person? Yeah, it damages your image as a person. You feel something, that feeling of like your skin kind of crawls by breaking the norm. It damages your image. You feel shame to break norms. This is why, if you're like a teenager and you go to school and you're wearing the wrong uncool type of pants, you are breaking the norms of fashion for your grade. And therefore you feel very uncomfortable. You don't want to stand out. So that's what norms are. They're these unwritten rules where the way you basically, you're governed by them, by the fact that because everyone is doing it, you feel compelled to do it. And therefore, you feel compelled because you don't want to feel shame and feel uncomfortable as other people are doing it. So those are norms. Now, norms are an incredibly strong way of regulating things. This is why you'll often find people who are willing to do things that are strictly speaking against the law because within their social group, it's acceptable or it's expected of you. This is why you'll have cases in which like fraternities will do incredibly horrible things during a rush week or trying to get into the fraternity, and people will be willing to do these things because the norms are saying do this thing. So even if something is heinous and terrible, if there's a norm that says it's okay, people will often do it. So norms are an incredibly strong way of governing or regulating a behavior. But what are the issues with attempting to use norms? So ideally then, what we could do is say, well, laws aren't going to be fully effective on the internet, and they need to be supplemented anyway. So maybe we can supplement them with norms. Why don't we just, put new norms in place to govern online behavior? Why doesn't it work to regulate by norms on the internet? What is the major issue with this? Why can't we just have it be the case that, we all have the unwritten rules of the internet and we all follow them to behave well and things are good, etc.? That's the key. Daniel says there's no face-to-face interaction. And because there's no face-to-face interaction, as Luis says, less shame, more privacy. If no one knows you're the one doing it, or at least if you feel that no one knows that you're the one doing it, then you'd be much, much, much more willing to do something. So for instance, one of the reasons that it's very rare for a racist person to walk up to someone on a street corner and yell racist slurs at them is because they know, one, they might get punched in the face, and two, they don't want to get weird looks from other people, even if they feel that way. On the internet, people don't have those worries. Why? Why is it that people are willing to use the N-word online, even if they'd never be willing to use it in person? Daniel.
Because you could hide online. There's no, your image is not gonna be damaged. People in your neighborhood won't label you as the racist person. They won't know you. You're a different persona online.
Yeah, so that is the key. Now, Joel brings up a good point, which is cancel culture has in some way stepped in as an overcorrection to this sort of thing. So it used to be the case. And even to this day, though, if you don't think anyone is looking at you or looking out for you, so if you have a username like boy444, and that's what your name is, you're willing to say just about anything, as long as you have that level of anonymity. Now, if you are using from your own official account, this sort of thing no longer applies. And one thing that is happening, thanks to cancel culture, both for good and bad, is that on the internet, people are now being tracked down for saying things, and the norms are kicking in. Only the issue is, as we talked about however long ago, a month ago or so, 2 months ago, they're overcorrecting in a lot of ways, where it's now that you're not just being held to the norms for things you say now, you're being held to norms for things you said 10 years ago or 15 years ago that you no longer stand by. So the thing with norms are they only work if you have some connection to them. So if you're using an anonymous username or something, you're going to be far more likely to say whatever you want. And if you aren't using it and you say something that's offensive, then you might get tracked down. But very often, people, because of cancel culture, are being extra careful around what they say, not anonymously. So you often have cases in which someone will make a second like burner Twitter account to curse people out because they don't think it'll be tracked back to them. Or you have a case in which somebody will, from like Twitter DM, or Instagram DM someone hateful things from an account that isn't tied up with them. So there's trends I've seen on TikTok. I'm just reading Joel's thing, where people would stalk a racist person and get information such as their college parents and would get them kicked out of school or ruin their career for it. So yeah, this is the sort of thing where the nature has changed. And one thing that we're seeing with norms is that because of the norms that exist in society, people are trying to get around these sorts of things. But here's another issue with norms, and I think this gets to the heart of cancel culture. A law is very clear as to what you are and aren't allowed to do. And there's a general sort of principled way of deciding what should and shouldn't be allowed. And you have, even if you are someone who's guilty, you are still in front of the law, given a chance to defend yourself. In the court of public opinion, what can end up happening is, unlike a law which is clear and there's a clear way in which you get punished, around norms, it's kind of a crapshoot of how is it that a certain person gets punished for going against the norms? And we don't really have a regulation around what is an acceptable punishment. So for instance, if I 5 years ago stole $100 from someone and I get caught, or let's say 1 year ago, I stole $100 from someone, or a better one, say 15 years ago I stole $15,000, and now it comes to light, we have a very clear set of rules about how I should get punished for that. Say someone there's a photo of a politician from 40 years ago in blackface. What is the correct punishment for this person? Where would we go to decide what's the correct punishment? Does everyone see the issue here? It's not clear what, in these sorts of cases, the right punishment would even be. So in some ways, norms are very strong, but on the flip side, they're also very vague. Like, if somebody is found with a picture of blackface from 40 years ago, should they lose their job? I don't know. And I think none of us know. And this is the kind of the issue around it, is you can see the arguments for, you can see the arguments against. If somebody, when they were 14, said something deeply offensive, should they be canceled today now that they're 22 and genuinely regret their actions? Seems like it might be too strong, but at the same time, you can see why somebody would want to cancel them. So does everyone understand this sort of worry? So yeah, the basic idea is that, we don't have clear norms, and a lot of times norms don't work on the internet. And then on the flip side, something that's come along with cancel culture is that on the flip side, when people do break the norms, very often the punishment is unregulated itself, unlike something like legality, which is clearly indicated. Yeah, Luis says jobs do background checks on that sort of thing too. Yeah. So like always, as I said earlier on, delete anything compromising off your Facebook, off your Instagram, off anything with your name attached to it. If you really, really want to have like an Instagram full of party photos, make 2 Instagram accounts, one with all your party photos and a pseudonym, and then a second Instagram account with all like your professional looking photos that make you seem perfect. Keep them separate, have the good looking one with your real name, have the party one without your real name, and don't have that attached to anything. If you're planning on going into regular face-to-face jobs. Yeah, a Finsta. Yep. Only in some ways, your Finsta becomes your real Insta. Because that's the one that actually has the real you. The Finsta's the nice, pretty one here. So that's the thing around norms. Now, the third way in which things often get regulated is market pressures. So or another way of putting this is economically. So I don't know if any of you are smokers. I'm not going to ask you this, but I'm sure all of you have a general idea. Buying cigarettes in New York City, how much for a pack of cigarettes approximately? Anyone have any knowledge of this or guesses on this? Yeah, 14, 15 bucks is about right. It's about 15 bucks. Now, why is a cigarette pack in New York City $15? Is it because it costs Marlboro $14 to make it and they want to turn a profit? No, it's taxed. It's taxed really highly. The amount of money you have to pay for a cigarette pack is very high because it's taxed. Why is it taxed? Why is it that a cigarette pack that maybe costs Marlboro $1 to make is cost 15? Well, it costs 15, exactly as Louis says, to try to get people to stop. That is the second type of regulation that exists, or the third type of regulation that exists, is market pressure and economic pressure. Basically, you manipulate the price of something in order to make people more or less likely to buy it. So another way, and this is just something worth talking about because I'm not sure how many of you have heard the word tariff in like the international trade setting, or tariffs? Have people heard of tariffs? Do people know what they are, or is it worth pausing for a second just for like a general description of how tariffs work? Because it's something that's worth knowing when it comes up in the news. So yeah, it's an international tax, but and again, this is not something I'm expecting anyone to know, and I just think this would be a good opportunity to like talk about a term that's useful to know. Do people want me to do this, or should I just plow on and just say tariffs are another way? Is that yes? Explain them, Carlos? Yeah, so here's the simple definition. Basically, here's the idea of how tariffs work. You, right here, you want to buy a little toy for your nephew. You have a toy that is like, a toy horse costs $10 if it was made in China because labor is lower. But the same horse would cost $12 if made in the US. Which one are you, as the consumer, more likely to buy? China one, simply because it's cheaper. But if the government doesn't want you buying the Chinese one, what they'll do is they'll artificially raise the price on this by making China pay a tax to you on it. So basically what it is if China wants to sell these toy horses, they have to pay extra money on top of it. So therefore, instead of being able to sell, like get into the United States, so imagine it takes them $1 to make it, and over here it costs them $3 to make it. So this is why China is able to sell it for less. No worries, Edgar. Well, what you do in the United States is you force China to pay a tax on top of this for like $2. So now China, if they want to make the price, or let's say you add on like $3 here. So what you do is you say, hey, China, if you want to sell your horse in the United States, you have to pay us $3. So now if China wants to sell their horse and make the same profit they did before of 9, they have to raise the price up to 13. So now you, the consumer, even though the US one costs the US more to make, are more likely to buy this one because the government has put a tax on China to cause them to have to raise their prices more. Does that all make sense to everyone? The basic idea is you just artificially raise the prices of another country's goods to encourage your people to buy your own goods. It's a way of stimulating the economy at home. So this is another way in which market pressures can be done to regulate things. Now, market pressures, though, and the internet. Why don't market pressures work as well as a means for regulating the internet? What is it about the internet that makes it so hard to just change the economics behind it? Well, why is it that something like a tariff works in the United States? Why is it that the US is able to put a tax on Chinese goods? What are we able to do? Why isn't it that the Chinese are just saying, screw you, we're not paying your tax? So they need us to buy their stuff. And specifically, we have the power to keep them out because we have physical borders. If you are a Chinese business and you want to sell in the United States, you have to obey the laws or the US government will not allow your goods to arrive. There can be smuggling, but on large scales, that's not really practical. At least with things like toys. You can do it with drugs and things like that, but smuggling in toys or smuggling in cars, it wouldn't work. So you have to obey these things. Contrast that with the internet. If the US government says we're not going to accept any goods sold from China on the internet, what would they have to do to ensure that that actually took place? Or you can't buy goods off a Chinese hosted website. What would they have to do? How would the US be able to do that? Like, how would they even be able to enforce these sorts of things? Just what would it entail? So yeah, they'd have to vet millions of websites and take them down. They'd also have to monitor all internet traffic. That's just completely impractical. You have to spend so much money and able to do this. It's just a completely impractical approach. Also, if you wanted to, the other thing with market pressures is, yeah, you have to have a major control over the workspace. So if you have a website that, you put artificial taxes on things being sold on a certain website, the nature of the internet is anytime you artificially raise the prices, someone else is going to come along and find a way to sell it on a different website that you haven't found yet. So that's another major issue is the nature of the internet is such that there's always more, because the internet is basically infinite in possibility, there's always going to be a case in which you can find somebody who's willing to sell the same thing for cheaper without the taxes, and you're not going to be able to stop them. So that's the final thing. Like, to go with one, the US could try to say all porn websites, you need to pay $1 to access. If you want to host a porn website, you have to pay the US government a porn tax. And you have to pay $500,000 a year in porn tax to host this website. Well, what's very quickly going to happen? If you had a porn website hosted in the United States and all of a sudden the government says you have to pay $500,000 a year to keep your website up, and what sorts of workarounds are there? One, they'll disguise it as something else so they might not be caught. And there's so much on the internet, you'd never find it. What else might they do? If you're the only thing, the US government can only put this tax on websites hosted in the United States. So what else might you do? Yeah, switch to a different server, move it to another country, host the server somewhere else. So it's just not practical in any way to control things by market pressures. So basically what we've got is a case in which none of these three old ways of regulating apply nicely to the modern world. Norms don't work if we don't know who you are. And if we do know who you are, then it ends up becoming vigilante justice for better and for worse. Market pressures don't work because of the nature of international commerce and international website hosting. And laws don't work because there's no enforcement and the laws don't come along fast enough. So generally speaking, does anyone know what way most websites are regulated now? What is the thing that stops people? What's the thing that stops you from getting onto a bank's website if you don't have an account there? The credentials, yeah, your login information. Basically, the fourth way of regulating something is what is called regulation by architecture. I don't know if this is how you spell architecture, but I really don't care. Architecture is you make something physically impossible to get to. So for instance, the way in which the Pentagon is regulated is physically by walls. The drugstore from before is regulated simply by building up the architecture so that you cannot get behind the counter. Bulletproof glass in a liquor store that you cannot get behind the counter to take the money because physically you're blocked from doing so. So what we've seen with the internet is this has become a major way of regulation. So what they've started doing is putting things behind paywalls, putting things behind login information. Or another one, a video game. You buy a new video game. You want to make a copy of that video game and give it to a friend. What stops you from doing it? Anyone who's a gamer know the answer to this? Or another thing, you get a copy of Microsoft Word. You want to make a copy and give it to a friend. It's not going to succeed. Why? Yeah, you need a license code, digital rights management code, DRM. So basically, yeah, when you log into a new program and you have to enter a bunch of letters, what that's doing is preventing you, it's built into the code that you cannot use the program without entering this password first. So this is the main way in which the internet and software gets regulated these days. Companies will build in that you cannot access it without, often another thing is you cannot access it without agreeing to their terms of service. So the main ways in which regulation end up happening these days are through the programs themselves. It's built in that you cannot access it. Now, this itself is a very, very effective way of regulating things. If you don't have a code, you're not going to be able to use that Microsoft Word. You can't get around it. It's not the law that you could just, as long as you don't get caught, you're fine. It's not like norms where if you're anonymous, you don't have to worry. It's not like as long as you can find a cheaper one, you're fine, because it's literally built in that you cannot access it. However, relying on architecture as your main form of regulation itself leads to ethical concerns. What are the ethical worries about having software architecture being the #1 way in which the internet and programs get regulated? What is the ethical worry here? Contrast it with a case. Think in your head if you're having trouble identifying what I'm going for. Contrast the case of when Microsoft puts DRM into their software versus a case of a law. What is the fundamental shift here? So one thing is not everyone can afford it. So one thing it does is it means that the people who are in charge, the people who are able to put these sorts of software in, or the people who are able to build up their architecture, are such that not everyone is able to afford it. So you end up with this thing where the people who are deciding and putting limits are people like Apple, or companies like Apple, like Microsoft, like Amazon, while a smaller person is not able to regulate their own software. So this is giving a competitive advantage to the people who already have the money to put these sorts of things in place. So has anyone been following, is it Epic has been in the big legal fight with Apple? Is it Epic Games that has? Yeah. So Epic Games, what do they make most famously? Fortnite, yeah. Epic Games makes Fortnite. And they are in a fight, a big legal fight that I think made it to the Supreme Court level with Apple. And the fight was about how is it that the App Store is allowed to work. So basically, Apple had a rule that the only way you're allowed to install an app on an iPhone is purchased through the App Store. And 30% of all sales, including in-game sales, so if you're buying a new skin or a new something for your Fortnite, Apple is constantly getting 30%. And they were able to do this because they literally built into their software that nobody was able to get around this. You could not sell something on the App Store if you did not agree to this. And it was literally physically, digitally, computerally impossible. You couldn't do it. And so Epic came along and said, this is illegal. This is a monopoly. And it had to go up to the Supreme Court level before anyone cast it down. But for years, Apple just decided that this is the way that we are going to do it. And they were able to put it in place. And everybody, even Fortnite, had to go along with it. And the only reason that this thing was able to come up and actually get to the Supreme Court level is because Epic Games is so wealthy that they were the first app that was able to go, hey, Apple, screw you. We've got the money to afford lawyers as good as yours. Let's go. The average person would never be able to do that. So given this sort of concern, what is it about, so what is tied in with this, the worries about having architecture as your main form of regulation, as opposed to a law? As again, as I said before, who decides the laws? The government, and who picks the government? In theory, we the people. Who decides the architecture on Apple's App Store? Apple does. Who picks the people in charge of Apple? Do we get a vote? Not us. Apple decides, the CEO. And what's their number one concern here? What is the number one concern of a CEO and a board of directors of a company like Apple? Is their concern fairness for the general population? No. As Daniel says, their concern is money. So one thing that we have with architecture being the number one way in which regulation happens is regulation is now incredibly strong in certain areas, but it's not strong in order to make the overall population better. It's strong in a way that allows companies to make more money. So what we end up with here is regulation that is stepping in on these sorts of things, only it's stepping in only when there's a threat to the bottom line. So for instance, recently Facebook decided it was going to get rid of its facial scanning software and its facial scanning database. Why did they decide to do that? I think this came out like 2 days ago. What was Facebook's reason for getting rid of it? Was it because they had, well, simply put, why was it Facebook decided to get rid of their database? Anyone have any guesses, even if you didn't read the article? What has been happening to Facebook recently that would encourage them to do this? Yeah, there have been breaches is one thing, but also what has been going on in the news involving Facebook? Anyone who's been following this? Yeah, the whistleblower lady. Basically, Facebook's PR has been shit for the past few weeks. And so because of this, they wanted to do something. Basically, what they came to the conclusion was continuing to have this database was going to cost them more money because it was killing their reputation. So it wasn't like they suddenly, for years, they thought this was fine because it was making them money. And it's only when the money got threatened that they were willing to change it. So this is the sort of thing that architecture does. It changes why we regulate things. It stops being as much of an ethical issue, and it starts being more of it starts being more of a money issue. And you might worry that if money is the thing driving it, and I have no say over what the companies are doing, this way of regulation is not an effective way of ensuring that the internet behaves in a way that is good for everybody. It's certainly going to make certain people a lot of money, but you might worry, is this really the sort of thing that is in any way viable or what I would want my country to have their companies doing? All right, so does everyone follow that? We all on board here? That's why regulation on the internet is so damn hard. None of the good ways work, and the way that does work is getting used by companies to do things for their own betterment, which raises ethical issues. Any questions at this point? All right. So we have 45 minutes left. So let us jump in with the next topic. We've been talking generally about why, in general, it's so hard. I now want to talk about some specific regulation topics. Are there any US internet laws? So yes, there are some, Daniel, around things that you are and aren't allowed to do and say. But usually speaking, they are under the like umbrella of laws that already existed. They're not like specialty internet laws. So for instance, the child pornography laws that have always existed do get applied to the internet, but there's not really laws around what you can and cannot do in a more general sense. Now, there are starting to be laws like, so I think strictly speaking, what Facebook did in a lot of cases was legal. And what they're trying to do now is come along and say, I mean, there were certain things that Facebook did which were presumably not legal. Like there are some iffies and questions and things like sharing personal information without getting explicit permission, or if your friend agreed to something, that information being sold to a third part. Like if your friend did this and then your information gets sold, that was a legal gray area. But in most cases, what Facebook was doing was legal. There weren't laws making that. It was just they knew they were causing problems and chose not to do it. So it was a more an ethical issue. And now the government wants to step in and put laws in place finally. But in most cases, things that Facebook did, things that Apple did, it's much more the PR that causes them to change, not the illegality of it. So now I want to talk about, but very good question. There are now two things I want to talk about. I'm not sure if we're going to get to them all, but let's start with hate speech. And what I want to talk about here is this is going to be a particular case of something in which hate speech, free speech, and the internet. And what I want to talk about here is the ways in which changes to the internet, or the ways in which internet has changed the nature of hate speech, and the ways in which regulation around this is almost not able to keep up with the changes that have been going on. So instead of just looking big picture at the difficulties of regulating, I now want to look at the particular ethical question around regulating hate speech and regulating free speech on the internet. So first question, what is hate speech? So racist comments definitely fall in the category of hate speech. Not all hate speech is racist, but racist comments definitely fall in the category of hate speech. It's about, and it's not necessarily, so it's tied in with discriminating towards others, but it's not every type of discrimination. So threats is actually a slightly different thing. So threats falls into the category of harm speech. So harm speech is closely related to hate speech, but threats fall into this one. So basically, just to give the definition, hate speech is any type of speech that is designed to cause someone emotional distress, and the speech is directed at some sort of characteristic that they have, be it race, sexuality, gender, disability, anything like that. So if you're saying something hateful towards someone with the aim of hurting their feelings, and you're doing it by pointing out one of their intrinsic race or gender or something like that, that is hate speech. Harm speech, by contrast, is any sort of speech which is designed to either incite or cause physical harm. So can anyone think of, other than threats, what would be another example of harm speech? Anyone know? Well, what is another thing that you might do that would be trying to cause physical harm to someone? It can be as a prank or something like that. Well, what would happen if you were to yell bomb in a crowded airport? It would cause panic. And not only that, what would happen as people panicked? They'd run, and what happens when a lot of people start running in every direction with no order? They might hurt themselves or others. So yeah, yelling fire in a crowded theater, that's what we mean by harm speech. Now, In the United States, is hate speech illegal? No. Hate speech in the United States is not illegal. Is harm speech illegal? Yes, harm speech is illegal. Hate speech is not illegal. Why isn't hate speech illegal in the United States? What is it that makes it the case that it is not illegal? There's no direct threat. And why don't we have a law that makes it illegal? Yeah, it's First Amendment. First Amendment right to expression, freedom of speech. So what is freedom of speech or free speech? If a nation has free speech, what does that mean? Or freedom of speech? Come on, I know somebody knows the answer to this. The United States has freedom of speech. What does that mean? Yeah, you're allowed to say what you desire or your opinions, and specifically, you cannot be punished for it by a government institution. You are not, yeah, you're allowed to say, if I think the president of the United States is doing a shit job, I can say, I think Joe Biden is doing a shit job and shouldn't have been elected. I cannot be arrested for that. Other countries, other governments, it's legal to do that. Or it's illegal to do that. If I were to say something along the lines of, if I was in China right now and I cursed out the government, I could get in trouble and be arrested for that, and that wouldn't be against the rules. They're allowed to do that. If, by contrast, the government were to knock on my door and try to arrest me for saying Joe Biden is being a terrible president, I cannot get arrested for that. And Joel says, you can't say I have a bomb as a joke. And the reason why is that's considered harm speech. Even if your intention isn't to cause panic, if it's foreseeable, like you should be able to recognize that saying I have a bomb in a crowded place is going to cause harm by causing chaos. So even if it's not intending to cause harm, if you can foresee that harm is going to come about by your actions, it's going to be considered harm speech. Same thing with it's illegal to go to it's illegal to go to a middle school and start handing out step-by-step instructions on how to make a firework at home. You aren't allowed to do that. Even if you say, I didn't intend the children to make fireworks, by doing that, you are putting them in a position to possibly cause harm to themselves. So that would also count as harm speech. So free speech is a right that applies to the US government. Now, here's an important thing. Are you allowed to say, does freedom of speech allow you to say whatever you want, no consequences in any part of your life? No, it does not. So to be clear, freedom of speech does not govern institutions like private institutions. If a private institution, a lot of people misunderstand this. If your business has a code of conduct that says no racist language, then the US government's free speech does not protect you. If you signed a code of conduct that says no racist language in the workplace, then even if you saying in public that somebody is doing something wrong, you can still be fired for it. The First Amendment only protects you against government intrusion or government control of what you say. The private company you work for, so in times of war, you can't say certain sorts of things. Specifically, I think you're allowed to you're allowed to protest wars, but you're not allowed to say things that might be used against our government. So you're not allowed to go around and tell, if you know war secrets during a time of war, you're not allowed to tell your neighbors hey, we're planning on sending out 3 battleships this way, or you're not allowed to post it on the internet because that puts the government at risk. But free speech is not something that even covers everyday things. So if you work at a company, call it, I don't know, let's say Staples. If you work at Staples and in your code of conduct, it says you cannot post things that are disparaging of Staples on your social media, and then you type, I hate Staples, you can't get arrested for that because of the First Amendment. But you could get fired for it if you signed a code of conduct that agreed, I will not do that thing. So does that make sense to everyone, that free speech is somewhat limited? Or these sorts of cases of people that get canceled. The reason why cancel culture is able to get off the ground is even if legally you can't get in trouble for saying certain sorts of things, if your company decides, and they very often have a very general statement like, I agree not to do anything that will tarnish the good reputation of our company. If they deem it that you've done anything that tarnishes the reputation, you can get fired for that. And that's why cancel culture is able to exist, despite the existence of the First Amendment, for better and for worse. This also means, though, if your business doesn't care about certain sorts of things, like if in your code of conduct, you are totally fine with certain sorts of language being used, and the government doesn't deem this to be an unsafe work environment, then it can end up being perfectly legal, as long as you're not breaking other laws in so doing. Now, there are other sorts of things that you aren't allowed to. There are anti-discrimination laws, so you aren't allowed to act against people or discriminate against people in your actions as a company. So like, you can't have a policy of, I will not hire anyone of color. That is illegal. You're allowed to say, I hate people of color, but you aren't allowed to not hire them because you hate them. That would be illegal. But free speech allows you to say whatever you want. Your company might fire you for it, but the government cannot. All this makes sense to everyone. So what I want to talk about now is some of the worries that come up with hate speech. So hate speech in the United States is perfectly legal. But here's the question. Should it be? Should we keep the First Amendment as it is in the time of the internet? And you might think, well, the First Amendment is very important and very clearly the case. But what are some of the issues here with allowing hate speech on the internet compared to hate speech in a pre-internet age? Why is it that hate speech is now so much more of a concern in certain ways than it was before the internet? A lot more exposure. So that's a really big one. 100 years ago, if I used the N-word, how many people could hear me using the N-word at maximum? 100 years ago, or even 150 years ago, who would be able to hear me using it? How many people could be influenced by what I'm saying? Yeah, exactly. It's however far my voice travels. Nowadays, if I come up with some crazy idea about how people of color are destroying the United States, and I post it to Facebook with a link to a news article, how many people can read that? Millions. Millions can theoretically read it. So there's this major issue here with hate speech is able to be heard by millions. And even if individually hate speech is not causing you physical harm, the fact is that by saying these things and having millions of people hear it, it's having a much bigger impact than it could have done when the only thing you could hear is my voice. So why is this such a worry? What is the worry now that 1 million people are hearing you say some terrible thing about people of color? What is the worry here? What does the difference in number matter? Why isn't it just a so what? More people can hear you, so what? What's the change now? Why should we be more concerned? Or maybe we shouldn't be. Why should or shouldn't we be? So one thing is it does cause a lot more harm Psychological distress is real distress. Like people who get abused emotionally, if you are somebody who gets emotionally abused on a day-to-day basis, you are more likely to commit suicide than somebody who's never emotionally abused. That's just the fact of the matter. So if there are millions of people who are able to reach millions of people, it is much easier to cause genuine psychological harm. In a way, if you hear one person use the N-word, it is going to be deeply offensive and upsetting, but it's going to be less upsetting than hearing 1,000 people use the N-word. And if you hear 1,000, you're far more likely to hear 1,000 people if you can get the words from people from everywhere around. And not only that, because each person is on the internet, one person using the N-word is going to be heard by many more people. So there's many more people who can offend you and many more people who can be offended. And the line between hate speech and harm speech then begins to blur. If I insult one person, you can say that's hate speech, but not harm speech. But if I say something and 1 million people are deeply emotionally troubled, the line between hate speech and harm speech starts to look a lot blurrier. What's another concern here? Why is it that hate speech has been in the news so much more often? What was going on early on in COVID in which hate speech was coming up again and again in the news? What happened early in COVID that was in New York and other places that made it onto social media and the news? Not just lots of protests, but what else was going on here? Discrimination, and specifically what sort of hate was going on when COVID first arrived in New York City. Yeah, discrimination against people, specifically Chinese, but people who were discriminating weren't always very careful, but it was basically just anti-Asian hate against large numbers of people. Why was it the case that people were suddenly convinced that Chinese people were responsible for causing this virus and brought it here intentionally? Why was that obviously not true statement being believed and leading to discrimination? Yeah, misinformation and internet rumors were able to go around. So another thing is, because of the nature of the internet and the nature of things like misinformation and fake news websites and rumors, what you can end up with is things that used to be considered hate speech can begin to turn into harm speech. If one person, especially a person in power, types out, "I can't believe that the Chinese people brought this disease which is killing all of us." Well, the line between a politician saying that and all of a sudden people going on the streets and starting to beat up Chinese people, it's no longer as clear that what this person was saying was just hate speech as opposed to harm speech. So very often, every so often there's a school shooting, or more commonly, or to go with a clearer example, something like a synagogue shooting or a mosque shooting or a church shooting. What is very often, when they find the person who committed this atrocity, what do they very often find out about the person? Like when their background comes out and their life story comes out, the person who goes into a church and shoots up a lot of people, what do we start to realize? Is very often found out when they start researching this person? Where did they spend a lot of their time? Visiting racist websites, 4chan. There's this way in which the internet, and very often they will say that they didn't really have the idea to do this until they went on the internet and were talking to other people. And this is the other thing that makes the internet tougher, is when somebody types something out on Twitter, it's very hard to tell the tone of what they're saying. So to go with, possibly the most famous example of this, when the Capitol was swarmed back in, January 2020? When the Capitol got stormed, Trump was saying that he was not making a call to arms. He was not telling people to actually storm the Capitol. And yet the people heard him as having said, "Storm the Capitol, I'm coming with you." So do we say that what Trump was saying was just some hate speech against other politicians? Or was it literally a call to arms? And with the nature of the internet and it being difficult to tell tone, it's in no way clear whether something is hate speech or harm speech. It just becomes very, very difficult to decide. So does all of this make sense to people about why this is so much more difficult? And so what we're finding is different countries are answering these questions differently. And different countries have different views on what should and shouldn't be allowed to be said on the internet. So in the United States, we are maybe the country in the world that is most open to allowing online hate speech. Other places are cracking down on it. So for instance, in Germany, you are not allowed to post anything pro-Nazi online. And if you quote something on Twitter, Twitter is legally obligated to delete whatever it is you said within 10 minutes, or Twitter can get in trouble. Another one is anyone I guess this came up in the context of English soccer. Did anyone see what happened in English soccer having to do with what happened at the Euros this past summer? Did people follow this story? So Carlos, what happened most recently? I guess what happened after the European Soccer Championship in England? And then what happened this week that's relevant to it? Does anybody know what I'm talking about? Daniel. Yeah, so part of it was England fans were pissed at Italians, but more specifically, England fans were pissed at their own players, and specifically the 3 players who missed penalty kicks. Daniel.
Oh yeah, the 3 players that missed the penalties, they're like dark-skinned players, so
yeah,
they were giving them a lot of racist comments online.
Exactly. The 3 players who happened to miss penalties also happened to be Black. And large numbers of England fans went online and started racially abusing these players. And one of them was 19 years old. His first time in a major tournament for England. And he was being abused online. And so the news that came out this week is that one of the people who posted a rant right after it happened was arrested and sentenced to 20 months in jail for racially abusing these players. So that is not something that could happen in the United States. You could lose your job, but you couldn't go to jail for it. In England now, you can go to jail for racially abusing soccer players for missing penalties. So this is the sort of thing where other countries do it differently. And I think there's a real question about where the correct place to draw the free speech, hate speech line is in the modern world. And I think there is a real question of, is the First Amendment right that served us so well for 200 years really something that we should keep around in a modern era? And so one of the paper prompts for paper 2 is on this topic of, do you think we should be allowed to continue these sorts of things? Or do we need new laws that control this? So if you're very interested in this topic, you'll have the opportunity to write on this. All right. Any last questions on hate speech, harm speech, free speech questions? Any questions at all? All right. If you have any questions or you want to talk to me about this stuff, I'm happy to do so, but I just want to talk about our last topic quickly. And this last topic is going to be one in which it shows how hard it is to regulate the internet, and that there are ethical concerns, free speech is a double sword then. It really is the same thing that allows you to say what you want and not be punished by the government, also allowing someone to be racist and hateful. And so you can't get rid of the hate speech without reducing free speech. But on the same side, so it's a matter of deciding what's the right amount, because we want as much free speech as possible without it causing hate and harm, but we can't get rid of hate and harm without reducing free speech. All right, the last thing I want to talk about is, porn and sexting. Why are we talking about porn and sexting as our final topic today? Well, because this is, again, something that is incredibly difficult to decide how to regulate. And specifically, sexting has become something that has become a topic that really nicely illustrates why it is so difficult to regulate the internet and why the nature of the internet makes regulation very different. So I don't think we need to define porn. I don't think everyone know what we mean by porn here. People having sex on video or in pictures. Everyone know what we mean by sexting, sending each other nude photos. Yeah, all right. Anthony Weiner, yes, that is a classic one. But also, you know, there are many cases not involving Anthony Weiner. So the laws around porn and sexting. Now, there's a lot of issues with porn and sexting from a legal standpoint. The laws are themselves very, very vague as what counts as legal and illegal around pornography. But one case that is very clear is child pornography, or at least it's much clearer than porn generally, because generally speaking, there's the laws against porn are things like you cannot have videos that based on the cultural standards are deemed just like demeaning or something else. And it's very vague and it's unclear what to say. But the child pornography law is at least a bit clearer, where the law says, let me just write it down here. So I'm just going to actually, no. So basically, how do we ordinarily understand child pornography? What is the ordinary definition of child pornography? Your common sense understanding of what child porn is. And to be clear, child pornography is illegal. What is it that we're talking about? Underage porn. And what do we mean by underage porn here? And I literally want to unpack even the most basic sorts of terminology. So yeah, we think of child pornography as people below the age of 18 engaging in sexual activities with one another. That's really the definition of child porn. However, the moment you define it in even this way, it starts to, so the rules are statutory. It's related to statutory rape laws. So statutory rape laws are laws that say basically an adult cannot have sex with a minor is basically the most straightforward laws on statutory rape. A person, so for instance, a person who is 40 years old cannot have sex with a 14-year-old. That is considered illegal. In the same way, a 40-year-old cannot have sexual photos of someone who's 14 in their possession. However, this is where things start to get blurry, because there seem to be things in which intuitively we wouldn't want to say is child pornography, and yet by this definition of child pornography counts as child pornography. So imagine that you have an 18-year-old who just turned 18 in November, and they have a significant other who's 17 and turns 18 in December, and 17 sends a sex video of themselves with number 18 together. 18 is 18 when the sex video is filmed. 17 is 17. Would you want to say that by 17 taking this video and sending it to 18, 17 has engaged in child pornography? Intuitively speaking, these people are a month apart in age. They've been in a relationship for 2 years. Is that intuitively child porn? Consensual video, to be clear. These people agree to make a sex tape together. So would you want to say it's child porn? Some people say yes, but now contrast it. Imagine it's a 40-year-old who engages in sexual activity with a 12-year-old and makes a video of it. In that case, we'd say this video is clearly child porn, right? Yeah, that's definitely child porn. This one over here, do you really want to say that somebody who's a month older than, so do you want to say that these people, they've been dating and having sex together for 2 years, and now all of a sudden, this person and this person for 1 month aren't allowed to have sex or do anything, and it's now illegal and wrong just because this one happens to have just turned 18? Do you begin to see the worry here? And not only that, imagine that the law for child pornography says 10 years in prison. I'm making up that number, but say 10 years in prison. If the 40-year-old has sex with the 10-year-old, would this be a just punishment, an appropriate punishment for this? If they make a video of it and post it online, would that be an appropriate punishment, 10 years for child pornography distribution? So it's not enough. Okay, so let's make it go up to, say, 40 years. Does that seem appropriate? For engaging in sex with a minor and posting a video of it? Joel, that is an amazing question, which I'm going to ask in a second. But in this case, imagine 40 years in jail for a person who at age 40 has sex with a 10-year-old. We're beginning to think maybe that's enough. Let's say even 80 years. But now imagine that we apply this same punishment over here. Imagine we gave 80 years in prison to the 18-year-old who had sex with the 17-year-old. Would that be an appropriate punishment? How many of you think that would be an appropriate level of punishment in this case? Yeah, hell no seems to be the appropriate response. And yet, legally speaking, if we define child pornography as sex between someone who's under 18 and someone over 18, we have to include this. Now, as a matter of fact, most places include a Romeo and Juliet clause in their pornography, which is, I think we may have mentioned this earlier in the semester. A Romeo and Juliet clause basically means that it doesn't count as child pornography as long as the people engaged in the activity are within 1 or 2 years of each other. So because they're so close in age, that wouldn't count as child porn. But this brings up the issue which Joel said. So those of you who aren't looking in the chat, Joel says, what if you keep the video of your 17-year-old significant other for 20 years and you're now 30? You have that video from when she was younger. She's the same age as you now. Is that illegal? That is a damn good question. Because at the time you took that video, well, first off, how many of you think that should be illegal? If you are now, so imagine you don't watch this video and it's just stored on your hard drive because you don't bother deleting your hard drive. And so you've got this video from, say, or even better, imagine it's a sex tape of 16-year-old you and 16-year-old significant other. At the time you were both 16, this was perfectly legal. It was a video that you took of yourselves and didn't do anything. You didn't distribute it. You just took a sex tape. Now, say you're age 40, you go back onto your computer and you watch a video or even possess a video of 16-year-old self having sex with 16-year-old self. By the laws of child porn, it seems like you possess a child pornographic video. But is that morally reprehensible to still have this tape that you never bothered deleting? It's not in any way clear. So do people see here why we're starting to, something like child porn, we want to regulate it. And yet, as soon as we start trying to come up with regulation, it gets very, very messy. Out of curiosity, do people have strong views on this? I have no idea what to say about this case. Do people have strong views? And I have no idea how the law would respond to it either. I think the law would probably say possessing this tape of this 16-year-old self with 16-year-old would be illegal. So you think it would depend on how old you are when you're watching the tape, Kevin? So yeah, I think it would probably be illegal, but there's a question of like, should it be illegal? I don't know. So yeah, other people think like as long as the tape was done consensually. And now let's talk about what makes it even more complicated, which is sexting. Because sexting is itself a type of pornography. It's nude images or partially nude images exchanged between people. And the issue with sexting is that we don't have specialized laws for sexting. And so what has stepped in are child porn laws that are incredibly strict and don't at all seem appropriate. So here's another issue. So let me just read this case that was in the reading. So in 2009, 6 teenagers, 3 girls and 3 boys were charged under child pornography laws in a sexting incident. 3 girls were ages 14 and 15. 3 girls, 14 and 15. 3 boys were 16 and 17. These nudes were sent from these 3 girls to these 3 boys. The girls were charged with felony distribution of child pornography. The boys were charged with felony possession of pornography. Eventually, it was reduced to misdemeanors, but by the letter of the law, these people were now sex offenders who had to be on the sex offender list for the rest of their lives. How many of you feel comfortable with this situation, that these were felons and these were felons in a consensual nude photo being sent? How many people are like, that's fine, these people are felons, they're child pornography distributors? And how many of you are like, I'm like a 14-year-old sending consensual nudes to a 16-year-old or a 15-year-old to a 16-year-old? Like, that seems too strong. How many people are in the, we need a different law for this sort of thing? Yeah, it seems like we want to be able to say it was consensual, and yet the only laws we had were these laws. Yeah, we need a new law for this sort of thing very, very badly, it seems like. Another thing that ties in with these sorts of issues is how do you decide? Let me see, I was going to say something else about these child pornography laws and sexting laws. Here's another one, which is, what do you do if, and here's a major difference with sexting versus like online website hosting. You cannot accidentally go to a porn website and look at an image. You have to type in the URL and go there. But can you get a sext against your desire? Can you get a sexually explicit photo? Yeah, you can. Those of you who are women on the internet, I'm sure at some point got some unwanted dick pic. That is something which happens all the time. So what do you do now if you are somebody who gets an unwanted photo from a minor? If, say, you're a like high school teacher, say a 35-year-old high school teacher, and one of your students gets a hold of your cell phone, and your student is 15 and sends you a dick pic, are you now in possession of child pornography? Is simply receiving it a felony because you are now in possession of this image? It doesn't seem like if against your will you are forced to possess this image, that you, in the moment you have it, are doing something illegal. It has been forced upon you by someone else. And it seems like the child pornography laws have no way of dealing with this sort of case. So does that make sense to everybody? And what do you think about this? Should it be like, should we put someone in jail just because somebody sent them an unwanted dick pic and that person was under the age of 18? Yeah, I like, you shouldn't be punished for getting something you didn't want. And yet the law, based on the definition being possession of underage images, would seem to suggest you should. Now, here's the last thing I want to talk about, which is, right now I've been assuming that we're dealing with real people. Things get even more complicated as soon as we start thinking about it in a digital realm. So, for this, we'd also need judges with better judgment. And it seems like in this case, we need to move away from the letter of the law. And yet we have an issue of how do you move away from the letter of the law? And another issue is just that child pornography is something that is bad. So therefore, the moves to make as thanks to the internet, child pornography is a much bigger problem than it ever was before. So people are starting to step in and wanting stronger and stronger laws around it. And we have this issue now in which we have stronger and stronger laws that end up catching in the net things that we don't want to get punished, like people who unintentionally get a dick pic. So here's the last thing I want to talk about, which is so what are deep fakes? And not necessarily in the context of porn, but what is a deep fake? Daniel.
It's like when they take someone else's face and they put it in somebody else's body while they're like performing something.
Yeah, so in porn, that's what it would be. But a deepfake is basically just any sort of computer-generated version of a person. So it's basically a person doesn't say something, but use an AI program to make it look as if somebody did it. Or in this case, you use a computer program to make it look like somebody is having sex with somebody else, when really so you would have like a celebrity having sex with someone in a porn, but really it's just like a really well done Photoshopped face that moves with the deep face program. So an issue here is our definition of kiddie porn or child pornography was sex with a minor. What if it's a deep faked minor? Imagine that it's a pornography in which nobody is actually having sex. It is a computer-generated video of an adult having sex with a 10-year-old. Should that be illegal? Well, let's zoom back a bit. So, Shad asks, so if both male and female is underage, I'm taking a tangent. If both male and female is underage and they're in the relationship where both parents know that they're in the relationship and they send nudes to each other, would that count as child pornography? It depends on the state. It depends on the place. It very well might. I mean, first off, somebody has to find out about it. But if somebody does find out about it, there's a chance that you could, depending on the state laws, be charged with child pornography, even if they are in a consensual relationship where they're both 16. And these are some of the worries that we have. Now, going back to the deepfake case, well, first off, what is it about child pornography that we do not like? Why is it we think it's bad? And it's a pretty straightforward answer, just like commonsensically, why is kiddie porn bad? Innocent children, specifically causing harm to innocent children who cannot consent to this. So it seems like it's about harm to children. They're being exploited and causing psychological pain, which can last all their lives. So by that definition then, that understanding, should we have any trouble with a computer-generated video of a child who doesn't actually exist, their computer CGI, and an adult who doesn't exist, CGI, being depicted engaging in sexual activities? Should that be treated as illegal child pornography or not? What are people's intuitions on this? So anime child porn would work too. So like hentai child pornography, should that be illegal? So this is exactly the problem. Some people's judgment are, it's fine, no one's getting harmed. And other people's judgments are, it's still child porn. It's people being aroused by images of children having sex with adults. And so I think the reason, and another thing you'd say is you're promoting it. And so maybe you're encouraging further people who will actually lead to harm. But on the flip side, just to play devil's advocate with something that the reading talks about, is imagine that you had somebody who has an urge to have sex with children, and they are able to offset these urges by watching child hentai porn, and therefore they never cause any physical harm. In that case, could we say that this sort of hentai child porn is better than not having it because this person is not engaging in it? Or would we have to say, like, maybe it's actually worse because it's encouraging other people to get in on it? And I really don't know what to say in this case. And really the main thing I wanted to bring up with this, And why pornography is, and especially child pornography, is something that's so good to talk about with regulation is because it's something at first glance, we all have very, very strong feelings on. Child pornography is bad and should be illegal. But as soon as you get into the details of it, it gets really, really messy really, really quickly. And you start to see why it's so hard to regulate something, even something as clear as child pornography, which we all want to be regulated. So, does anyone have any last questions on any of this stuff? We're at the end of our time, so I just want to make sure that everyone is on board and understands everything. All right. The last thing I want to say is, for those of you who came in a little late, I'm going to be turning back the papers this week. I'm going to try to post them to the Blackboard. I've not done that before. I've usually just emailed, but I've decided I want to try to do it through the Blackboard so it's easier for you to know where your grade is and it won't get lost in your inbox. So check the Blackboard this week for your papers being returned to you. If I am completely failing on Blackboard and have to email them, I'll just post to the Blackboard like, hey, check your email for your returned paper. All right. Have a great weekend, everyone. Last weekend, my class that told me it was daylight savings was lying to me. It wasn't daylight savings. This weekend's actually daylight savings ending. Enjoy your extra hour of sleep or work or whatever it is you're doing, and I will see you all next Friday. Have a good one, everyone.